Hello guys, welcome to lesson number 61 in our drawing series, Drawing Tutorials for Beginners. We're well over halfway now, I would say, with our pet portrait of our dog Myla. I went a little bit further towards the end of the last lesson and I just started darkening up some of this shadowed area to the bottom left and just started to, really just continue adding some of the hair textures over towards the rest of the face. So we're going to just continue now bringing some of that fur texture over to the right hand side of the face as we look at it. I'm going to be using our 2-inch brush. I've freshened up our kneaded eraser just by pulling it apart a little bit, and I've resharpened my pencils. We're going to be focusing again with the 2H, HB, 2B and some of the 4B as well. So without further ado, I think I'm going to start off with the HB pencil. I've made sure that I've washed my hands. We don't want to be getting any oily residue on our picture. And let's get started. So I think I'm just going to start in this muzzle area here. Again, working with our tapered stroke. If you're visiting my channel for the first time or you've recently joined our Facebook group and you're unsure as to what a tapered stroke is, what we're doing with all of our drawings is rather than a scribbling action, we're pulling the pencil towards us, making a kind of striking action onto the paper. We're using very, very little in terms of pressure. And I've heard a couple of ways of describing the tapered stroke. One of them is like beating eggs if you were doing some sort of baking, and it's this sort of pulling action towards you. And also one explanation that I've sort of used for the last year or so is if you imagine an aeroplane landing first on the runway and then taking off again, we've got this swooping down action. And that's definitely something that I think about when I'm doing this. Now, when we're drawing fur here, it's important that we don't close the gaps between the pencil strikes too much. We want this textured effect and we want this to look as though what we're drawing is fur. If we were drawing a face and we wanted a very smooth sort of texture or a very smooth finish, we would pay more attention to keeping these pencil strokes much closer together and sort of filling in any gaps. But because we're drawing a furry creature, we want that to, if we look at our reference, we've got various different directions and various different gaps in between the furs, which is definitely something that we want to try and recreate with our pencil strokes. I would definitely recommend you going and having a look at our Essential Pencil Skills playlist. If you go to the top of the Facebook group, which is called Tutorial Tuesdays Beginners to Pro, if you search for that, you can join the group. If you ask to join, I will, of course, accept you. And at the top of the group, there's something called announcements. If you actually click onto the group itself, rather than just looking at the notifications as they pop up on your news feed, there's a section that's called announcements, and anything that I deem important, so the latest videos, the tutorials, anything that we've done, any new playlists that I've created, I pop them into that playlists category. And in the playlist category, you'll find my first 6 lessons, which are called Essential Pencil Skills. And I really would recommend going and having a look at those, even if it's something that you've looked at before. Maybe you've sort of quickly looked over some of the videos, and really just master and listen to exactly why we're doing the things that we do and the way that we're laying the graphite down. It's quite different, I guess, to how a lot of you will have worked in the past. You'll know that we don't use any blending tools, so we don't use tortillions or blending stumps or whatever it is you want to call them, paper stumps. And the way that we talk about things like direction of light and understanding the intricacies and the details for me is so important. And I go through a lot of those during the lessons. Every lesson I talk about various things, but the Essential Pencil Skills playlist for me is super important. So have a look at those. Like I say, go and join the Facebook group, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you hit the notifications icon, which is the little bell icon just to the side of where it says subscribe, you can turn the notifications on so that you know exactly when I release a new video. Now what I'm doing here is I'm working in the darkest areas with my HB pencil, and I'm just trying to follow the basic direction of these hairs, this very, very short fur that we have on our dog. And it's getting that initial layer down and really paying attention to the direction that it's laying is super, super important. And once you've got that, we can then start to go in with some darker values, the 2B, maybe even the 4B, to really start to bring the definition out. Now, I've seen a few of your posts over on the group. I saw one only a couple of days ago. Somebody's gone a little bit further with our dog portrait, and it looked wonderful. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work. I also think that no matter what stage you are at with any of your projects or any of your commissioned work that you're doing yourself, or even, maybe what level of artist you are or you feel you are, I think it's really important that we do share our work, because it's so motivating for people that, I know look at other people's work, with envy, and we always try not to compare ourselves to other people's work, but it's very difficult to do. But I just think it's extremely motivating for people that are maybe just starting out or going through a little bit of a rut, within their art, to just see how some people are getting on and getting inspiration from people that have maybe turned a corner and started to really grasp concepts or ideas. But also, don't be afraid to ask for some advice. There's a lot of great artists on our group, and I am very conscious that we're probably one of the only art groups that I've come across, and obviously I've not come across every art group over on Facebook, but we're one of the more mature groups. We don't have these silly political arguments and people posting spam. I do remove the odd spammy post and, block the odd spammy user, people that are obviously not in the group for the right reasons and here to share and learn. But apart from the odd one, I do feel that we're quite well represented by quite a few adults and, people that are really here to learn and share. So I'm using my 2-inch soft brush now. That's the only thing, the closest thing that you'll find me using to a blending tool. I'm going to come over towards the top of our head now. And you'll notice this sort of haphazard way of drawing. I go from one area to another. I'm not one for completing one section. I see a lot of artists over on YouTube and various art forums and Facebook groups that their method is they start in the top left corner, a little bit like if we were writing as a right-hander. We start in that top left corner. I guess you start up there if you're a left-hander as well. And they complete one section, completely finish it off so that they've got all of their values and tones in there. Now, I don't personally like that method, simply because I want to have control over my entire drawing throughout the entire process. And I find that if we work one area to completion too early on, then what we tend to find is If I've gone too dark in a certain area, I then have to bring the rest of the drawing up to that value, because one of the most important aspects when we are learning to draw for realism, which is really what we're doing here, this isn't an exercise in cartoon or abstract drawing. I'm trying to teach you how to draw realistically. It's what I fell in love with a few years ago. But if we do want to draw for realism, then one of the key and fundamental areas is contrast, and having enough contrast in the areas that are the darkest, but also having those very, very light areas, identifying where the whitest or the brightest areas in your drawing are in comparison to the darkest areas. And I just find that sometimes if we go too dark in an area that maybe didn't need it because we were working to completion in that zone, we then have to bring everything else up, and it requires more work, it takes more time, uses more materials. So I like to draw in this sort of, you could call it a haphazard way of dotting around the drawing, and really just building the values and the layers up sort of gradually. Again, I'm just trying to get a feel for the general direction of these strands of hair. I'm using this tapered stroke and I'm almost pulling to a V. So I'm making each set of strokes, so every 2 strokes I'm sort of trying to meet into the middle. So you could almost call it like a letter Y that I'm drawing, or definitely a capital V. Because if you look very closely at the reference image, that's exactly what we find. And as the grain of the hair, or the direction of the hair, comes more towards the center of our dog, the lines tighten up and then they will fan out towards the right as we look at it. So it's just being aware of those value changes. And this HB layer is really just an underlayer. We will go in with some of the 2B as well as our drawing develops. So I can now see, as I'm coming over this eyebrow, that the strands of hair are fanning out over towards this direction. We've got this slightly lighter rim across the top of, it's obviously not an eyebrow because dogs don't tend to have eyebrows in the same way that humans have, because they're obviously covered in hair, but we do have this definition which is created by the undulations in our dog's shape of its head, because what we're drawing here is a very light but also very short-haired dog. And what that means is we're going to be able to get a lot more of the details of the actual structure underneath the skin and the fur than we would do with a longer-haired dog. One of our earlier projects, I can't remember exactly how many projects in, but I found a beautiful reference image of a Siberian Husky, which has obviously got much longer hair than our Weimaraner here. And you didn't get the same structures as we've got here now. So again, this is although we're drawing another pet portrait, it's another animal. There's some different things to consider. So you'll remember that I spoke earlier on in the video about having a technique where we aren't going to be using blending stumps and tools to blend. This is the technique that I've really settled on. I've tried lots of different methods over the years, pretty much the same as what you're doing right now. I spent a lot of time on YouTube trying to just figure out how people were creating some of these wonderful pieces of work that I was seeing popping up on Instagram and Facebook. And I tried all different methods, but this is the way that I've really settled on drawing for realism. It is more time consuming, I get that. But forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think anybody gets into art and wants it to be a quick process. I don't think anybody goes in naively thinking that they're going to be able to A, master the skills quickly, but B, produce things in record time. But what we do have, once we master the technique and we understand the nuances of how we're building up these values, what we have is a beautifully drawn, instantly recognizable face, dog, landscape, whatever it may be. And one that from a distance, what we're looking for is, we're looking for almost photorealism. I understand that that's very different in certain people's eyes. What is photorealism? But I want to create a drawing that people have to take a double take and say, actually, what is that? Is that printed? Is that an actual photograph? And as they get closer, they look at it and they go, actually, I can see the individual pencil strokes in there. But yes, the idea of using blending sticks for me now is one that I really resist. Well, resist is the wrong word because it doesn't even come into my consideration now. And the reason for that is one of the most important aspects when we're using this technique is having the ability to take away value. In the same way that our pencil adds value and increases the contrast in the darkest areas, we also need to be able to use an eraser in the same way as we use our pencil so that we can take away value. And we're going to do some of that within the fur, because if you look at your reference image, we've got white hairs, which is where the light is hitting various hairs intertwined with the darker hairs. Now, if we use our blending stump, what we do is we take away, let me show you actually now. I'm going to use my Mono Zero eraser, just cleaning the edge up, just giving that a rub onto the edge. So this is a Mono Zero eraser, it's a mechanical eraser, it's very thin. So looking at this area in the middle here, this is very, very light. Now I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a different colour of fur, but what it is it's an area of the dog that the light is hitting and reflecting in a different way to the surrounding areas. So these light patches give the viewer the illusion of dimension. Our brains are programmed to interpret the way that light works. We've been doing it since birth. That generally speaking, with a few exceptions, and clouds being one of them, and we've spoken about that before, but generally speaking, the closer something is to us or the light source, the lighter that area is. The further away something is from the light source or us, the darker that tends to be. So as you can see, I'm using my pencil now in exactly the same manner as I'm using my eraser in the same manner as I was the pencil a couple of minutes ago. And I'm just making those V-shaped strokes, and I'm removing value. And I can see now that I need to remove some value in this region. And it's these very subtle strands of hair, these light hairs, that give us a sense of realism. Again, I'm just following the pattern of the hair, the way that the lines of the hair are falling. I'm not worrying too much about trying to get every single individual hair in there. That can often look too forced and unnatural. So I'm looking for a general direction. And I'm trying to recreate the look of it by doing that. So I'm going to use my 2B pencil now. I'm going to come in with the 2B pencil, again making sure it's sharpened up. And I think I just need to darken some of these areas around our dog's right eye as we're looking at it. It would obviously be our dog's left eye. And again, I'm using a very similar amount of pressure. I'm not bearing down on my pencil. And what I mean by that is I'm holding it sort of halfway up. I'm not too close to the tip. And I'm using this tapered stroke. I'm just increasing the value in these specific areas. And then the process will be using the brush to move some of the graphite around, and then taking some away again with the eraser. And it's that process that, yes, I understand takes a while. But as I'm sure you can see by the way that our dog is taking shape here, it's one that really is a joy to look at. You know, it's beautiful seeing her taking shape. Now I'm making sure that I'm never pressing on too hard. I don't want to gouge the tooth of the paper. By gouging it either with the pencil or with a kneaded eraser, what I do is I make it very difficult and in some cases impossible to remove any of the graphite at a later date. And by building our drawing up the way that we are, if you ever need to, and I hope you don't, but if you need to erase an entire section, you've absolutely got the ability to do that. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, if you press on too hard with your pencil, or you, for whatever reason, have embedded the graphite down into the tooth of the paper, what we are left with is something that's impossible to remove entirely. So I need to just bring up the value in some of these areas, some of these wrinkly areas that we have towards the top. They're not too deep crevices, so we don't need to have an awful lot of value in there, but I just want to bring the value up against the surrounding area, just so that we don't lose our way with the drawing, because as we build the value up, it's very easy to lose certain details. I'm going to use the brush again now. So just brushing from the darkest areas into some of the lighter zones. It's this constant layering of these different textures that are ultimately going to make our dog's fur look realistic. It's very similar to drawing hair. I'm going to come back with the HB pencil in this lighter zone here now, because again there is a texture in there, although this is a very light area, and the way that this reference photograph has been taken, it's the centre, the eyes and the nose or the muzzle are very focused, they're very sharp, but as we move away from that area, the details become slightly less defined. It's all the rage at the moment. I mean, you can even get certain filters and settings on your camera phones or your photos on your your cameras on your phone, that you know, your iPhone or whatever it is, or even some of the filters that we can get on apps and things. What they do is they bring the focus into a certain area and fade the background out, make it slightly blurry. Now, we've got an effect like that on this drawing, so I don't want the hairs in the texture to be as defined in this zone as we do in the centre. But nevertheless, there is still a fur texture in there. So that's why I'm just using my HB pencil in that area there. And I can now take away some intermittent hairs with my Mono Zero eraser. And then just brush any excess rubber and graphite away. I think the 2B, I'm wanting to try and get some of these details in this centre that we were talking about. So there's definitely some definition within the hairs in this middle part, but there are some rather large gaps, and there are some areas that are very white, and that's the contrast that we're looking for. And the more that you practice looking for shapes, value changes, things like that, obviously the better you become at it. Or it gets to the stage that actually when I'm looking at my reference image, I'm no longer looking at a dog. I'm just looking at what I'm seeing is value changes, areas of darker value, areas of lighter value, and small patterns start to emerge. A little bit like if you were to look up at the sky on a cloudy day. It doesn't take you long for your brain to start seeing shapes and patterns and being able to recognize faces or animals. That's one of the skills that we are developing here. If you want to freehand things so that, we're not using a grid or anything like that, one of the most important techniques for you to use is to look at your image that you're trying to draw freehand and break it down into some rudimentary shapes. So if we were drawing a shoe, for example, how can we break it down so that we've got some very simple shapes that we can lay down initially? They might be circles, triangles, rectangles, squares, oblongs, things like that, to then build from. Paying attention, like I say, to the direction that these hairs are taking. They're almost vertical in the centre here, and then they fan out to the left and the right as we're looking at it as we move away from the centre. Now you'll notice that I haven't had to yet sharpen my pencil. Every couple of strokes what I'm doing is I'm just turning my pencil around. And because I'm coming at it at an angle, so I'm holding the pencil in a certain way so that it's not pointing directly down onto the page, we have this type of self-sharpening effect going on. And what that means is, A, I'm saving time, because every time I need to sharpen the pencil, it's a minute or so that I'm not able to draw, so we get through the drawing a little bit quicker, but also we save money in the long run. Every time you have to sharpen your pencil, we're ultimately making it shorter. And that, in the long run, costs us money. So we've got this kind of darker patch around the nose. We've got different values within there. It's not all the same value. It's not all dark. And I can remember when I first started drawing, getting really hung up on the idea of which area of the drawing was 2B and which area of the drawing was HB and which area of the drawing was 2H. And as I'm becoming more aware of exactly what's happening within these values, I understand that it's actually a build-up of various different pencils. So, within this lightest area here, there's some 2B. There's also some HB. We've then taken value out with our eraser. So you wouldn't be able to easily identify any one part of the drawing as being, oh, that's solely HB, or that's solely 2B. I've done some drawings before that in the lightest areas which resemble white, maybe white clothing, I've got lots of HB and 2B in there. It really all depends upon how well you build the contrast up around that area. So I can make an HB pencil look white as long as the zones around the HB pencil are much darker. And each time that I brush, I create a new layer I can then take away again. Some of these hairs are now coming up and over to the right. It's one way in which we would draw a white beard or white hair. There's constant building up of layers. It gives you this very intricate sort of meshed pattern. And we can then play around with that by taking out value, adding value to make something look like it's more recessed. So we've got some of these lovely hairs now that are falling over to the right, and they're arcing over to the right. They're going horizontal, and then the further down the muzzle we get, they're now pointing towards the bottom of the head, so they're tilting all the way down and around. Now you can see that although we haven't actually put any value into this right side of the face, because we have been using our brush quite a lot, that what we've actually got is we've got a lot of value in there. So this area here, I haven't laid any graphite down purposefully, but we have got value in there to play with already, simply from the movement of the graphite around using our eraser. And again, it's one of the beauties of not using blending stumps, etc. It gives us the ability to remove graphite, and the removal of the graphite is just as important as the addition of graphite. And once you understand that concept, the idea of blending stumps and things like that really aren't something that you would consider. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser now. I'm just going to roll it into a ball and make one end slightly pointed, because this texture around the muzzle to the right hand side here is quite irregular. And I just want to try and create that irregular undulation that we have going on in there. And the best way of doing it is this kind of stippling effect. Again, I'm not being too picky and trying to get every single lump and bump in there, but what I am doing is I'm dabbing the kneaded eraser up and down to give me lighter areas, darker areas, just to give us something to then work with. And then I can use my 2B pencil to bring out some of the darker zones and really just define certain areas. But already there now, I can see that what we're creating is a rather realistic look of dimension and texture. Now, I talk about texture an awful lot, and texture and contrast are vital ingredients to make your drawings look realistic. And this dog has a couple of different textures in there. So we've got the texture of the eye, which is this almost marbly look. So we want to create a very smooth, very reflective look to our eye, which I think we're certainly doing an okay job of. We've then got the short hair, which we're using various techniques to create. And then we have this lumpy type texture. And the three different textures come together to create something that, when the viewer looks at it, the contrast in values, the contrast in textures comes together to create this illusion. And again, what I will do is I will just brush some of that again to give me another layer of, or the ability to create another layer, and then just repeat the process. So looking for some of those slightly lighter parts. Even within a dark zone, there are going to be darker areas, but also some lighter areas too. I'm going to use the HB pencil now to bring out some of this texture. So I'm just conscious now of the time. We've slightly overrun our regular 30-minute slot, which is easy to do when we're getting into the nitty-gritty. But I just want you to continue, for maybe another half an hour, going through the methods that we've been doing. So we're going to start filling out some of the textures in this area. Bring a little bit more value into the hair in the centre there, and hopefully for the start of the next lesson we're really going to get into this ear on the right side as we're looking at our dog. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. It really does make a huge difference when you give these videos a like, you share them, you subscribe to them. I'm really enjoying making this series. It's been fantastic getting to know some of you on the Facebook group. So if you haven't subscribed or joined in with any of our videos before or shared your work, then I really would suggest going ahead and doing that. I can't wait to see how you get on with this picture. It's a lovely drawing to spend some time on. I'm enjoying it. I hope you are too. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hit subscribe, smack the notifications button, follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.